All right, so get this. You sent in a research paper on military deception for us to deep dive into today, and wow, this thing is it's packed.
Oh, yeah?
We're talking the art of deception in military tactics, a comprehensive analysis, ancient strategies, modern cyber warfare. I mean, it's all in here.
Sounds fascinating.
So get ready, folks. We're going to be uncovering how deception has actually shaped the battlefield, exploring some truly mind-blowing examples.
I love those.
And maybe even question a few assumptions along the way.
You know, you really hit the nail on the head there. Deception, it's not just some kind of sideshow in warfare. It really is fundamental.
Oh, okay.
Manipulating your enemy's perception. I mean, that's always been key to victory.
So it's not just about brute force then?
Not at all. Think about it like judo.
Okay.
You're using your opponent's strength against them. You're not necessarily looking to overpower them, but you're looking to outsmart them to make them make mistakes that actually work in your favor.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this goes way beyond just hiding in the bushes.
Exactly. And this idea has been around for centuries. I mean, just think about the Trojan horse.
Oh, of course. Who could forget that? A giant wooden horse full of soldiers.
Right. But it's not just about the spectacle of it. It's about the strategy behind it. The Greeks, they understood that the Trojans were completely obsessed with their victory, and they used that against them.
Oh, clever.
They made the enemy want to bring destruction within their own walls.
Wow.
Pure psychological genius.
Yeah, that's a pretty good trick if you can pull it off.
Yeah.
But surely there's got to be more to it than just these one-off stunts like that.
Absolutely. This is where Sun Tzu's Art of War comes in.
Okay.
He famously wrote, "All warfare is based on deception." And his book, I mean, think about it, this was written over 2,500 years ago.
Wow.
It lays out a whole philosophy of deception.
So it's not just about tricks, it's a whole way of thinking about warfare.
Exactly. Sun Tzu talks about making your opponent misjudge your strength, misjudge your intentions, and he advises, appearing weak when you're strong, seeming disorganized when you're actually prepared, even looking inactive while you're actually advancing.
So it's all about creating this kind of elaborate illusion, this false reality that your enemy buys into. But how does that actually play out in a real battle?
Well, one of the earliest forms of deception was camouflage. It actually evolved from hunting techniques, believe it or not.
Really?
Ancient armies, they would use the terrain to their advantage. They would set up false campfires to make your forces look bigger, or even kick up dust clouds to hide their movements. It's all about disrupting your enemy's ability to gather accurate intel.
So you're basically creating this fog of war even before the fighting starts. But right. I'm guessing things got a lot more elaborate over time.
Oh, they did. And sometimes that misdirection, it could happen on a massive scale. Think of Hannibal crossing the Alps to attack Rome.
Wait, wasn't that one of the most famous military campaigns in history?
It was, and a huge part of its success was due to deception. Oh. Everyone expected Hannibal to attack from the south. I mean, it was the logical route.
Right.
But he completely surprised them by marching his army. And this included war elephants over the Alps.
Wow, talk about playing against expectations.
Yeah.
But this makes me wonder, how did he pull that off? Didn't anyone notice an army moving through the Alps?
It wasn't easy.
Yeah.
Hannibal, he had to contend with treacherous terrain, hostile tribes, and of course keeping his movement secret.
Yeah.
But that's the genius of his plan.
Yeah.
He exploited the Romans' assumptions. They simply didn't believe it was possible.
So he basically won half the battle before it even began. Are there any other examples from ancient times that use this kind of large-scale deception?
Absolutely. The Mongols under Genghis Khan, they were masters of deception. They'd use feigned retreats to draw enemies into ambushes, making their opponents think they were winning when they were actually walking right into a trap.
Oh.
They even used dummy soldiers on horseback to inflate the size of their forces.
Okay, that's just straight up clever. But I'm guessing things changed quite a bit once gunpowder entered the scene, right?
You bet. Gunpowder, it revolutionized warfare, and it made battles much more lethal.
Yeah.
So hiding and protecting your troops became even more vital.
So it's no longer just about tricking your enemy into charging into a trap. You have to think about protecting yourself from this devastating new firepower.
Exactly. And this led to all sorts of new deception techniques. Armies started building these elaborate fake artillery positions, for example, to fool the enemy into wasting their ammunition.
If you can make your opponent fire on a bunch of dummies, you're already a step ahead. Did this lead to any other changes in how deception was used?
Absolutely. Deception became more organized, more sophisticated.
Yeah.
In the 17th and 18th centuries, we see this rise of spying and counterintelligence as key elements of warfare. It became a battle of wits, trying to outmaneuver your opponent in the shadows.
Like a game of chess, but with real armies and real consequences. Are there any particular figures from this period who really stood out in terms of their use of deception?
Oh, definitely. Someone like Frederick the Great of Prussia, he was a master of using spies and spreading disinformation.
Okay.
He would constantly keep his enemies guessing, never quite sure where his forces were or what his true intentions were.
So he was basically running this constant psyops campaign against his enemies, always keeping them off balance. Did anyone else use similar tactics?
Absolutely. And perhaps no one was better at this than Napoleon Bonaparte.
Oh, wow.
He was a genius when it came to operational deception, constantly shifting his troops around, using diversions, feints, to mask his true intentions.
So by this point, deception wasn't just about hiding. It was about actively shaping what the enemy thought they knew.
You got it. And as we move into the 20th century, things get even more complex with these rapid advancements in technology.
Well, this is where it gets really interesting for me. World War I, in particular, always seemed like such a kind of a stalemate to me. Trench warfare, everyone dug in, not a lot of room for maneuver. How did deception work in that kind of environment?
That's a great question. And you're right. World War I, it presented these unique challenges for deception. It wasn't easy to pull off a surprise attack when you were facing miles of trenches. But that didn't mean people didn't try.
I remember reading about some pretty bizarre tactics from that era. Weren't the British using fake heads in the trenches?
That's right. They actually placed dummy heads, literally fake soldier heads, in their trenches to draw enemy fire and try to get a sense of the enemy's position.
That's both brilliant and a little creepy, don't you think?
Absolutely. But it highlights the lengths that these armies were willing to go to gain an advantage, even in this seemingly static war.
So even in the trenches, this battle of wits was still raging.
It was. And for some, deception became a core part of their military doctrine. The Soviets, for example, they developed this whole system of layered deception known as maskirovka.
Okay, maskirovka. Now that's a new one.
Think of it as this strategic game of smoke and mirrors, but with very real consequences. Maskirovka was all about misleading the enemy at every level, from disguising troop movements to creating false radio chatter.
Yeah.
All designed to make the enemy see what you want them to see, not reality.
So the Soviets elevated deception to an art form. But how did this all play out on a larger scale? Was maskirovka used effectively during World War II?
It certainly was. But World War II also saw the emergence of some of the most elaborate and successful deception campaigns in history. And I'm talking both sides implemented these.
I'm thinking of operations like the double cross system, right? Weren't the Allies able to turn German spies into double agents?
Exactly. It was a brilliant move. The Allies, they identified German spies operating in Britain, and then they turned them, fed them carefully controlled misinformation that was then passed right back to the German high command. The Germans thought they were getting valuable intel, but it was all part of this carefully orchestrated deception.
So the Allies were playing them like a fiddle. Any other examples of large-scale deception from World War II?
Absolutely. One of the most famous is Operation Bodyguard, the deception plan for D-Day.
Right.
The Allied invasion of Normandy back in 1944.
This is the one where they created a whole fake army, right? I remember reading about inflatable tanks and fake radio chatter.
Yeah.
All designed to make the Germans think the invasion was going to happen somewhere else entirely.
You got it.
Right.
They created this so-called First U.S. Army Group.
Right.
A phantom army, complete with dummy tanks, fake radio chatter, even phony headquarters.
Wow.
All positioned to make it look like the main invasion force was going to land at Pas-de-Calais, not Normandy.
I've always been fascinated by the level of detail that they went into. They even had famous generals like Patton leading this phantom army, knowing that the Germans were obsessed with him.
It's incredible, isn't it? They created this entire parallel reality, all designed to mislead the Germans and ensure the success of the real landings in Normandy. And you know what's amazing? It worked.
Well, at least for a while.
Yeah.
But the Germans must have caught on eventually, right? I mean, once the real invasion began, they must have realized they'd been tricked.
They did. But the deception, it bought the Allies valuable time.
Yeah.
The Germans, they were so convinced that Pas-de-Calais was the main target that they delayed sending reinforcements to Normandy.
Oh, wow.
Giving the Allies a crucial advantage in those early critical days of the invasion.
It's mind-blowing to think about how much planning and coordination went into these deception operations and how they really did change the course of the war. But it also makes me wonder, can you really justify tricking people on that scale? Where do you draw the line ethically?
That's a great point, and it's a question that's been debated for centuries. Deception in warfare is a complex issue, no easy answers. And as technology advances, those ethical lines become even blurrier.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. But I think we're getting a little ahead of ourselves.
Yeah.
Before we dive into the ethics of deception, let's explore a few more examples of how it's been used, especially in more modern conflicts. I'm dying to know what kind of tricks they're pulling off with all the technology we have today.
You know, it's fascinating how technology has always played a role in deception.
Yeah.
Both in creating these new possibilities, but also forcing those using deception to adapt.
Yeah, it's like a constant game of cat and mouse.
Right.
As soon as one side develops a new technology, the other side has to figure out how to counter it, or even better, how to use it to their advantage.
Exactly. And World War II is a great example of that. The invention of radar, it created this whole new challenge for military deception.
Because suddenly you couldn't just hide in the darkness or behind a smokescreen anymore.
Exactly. Radar could see right through all that.
Right.
So armies had to get creative. They started developing things like chaff, bundles of aluminum strips that were dropped from planes to create these false radar blips.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I remember reading about Operation Taxable, where the British used chaff to make the Germans think that this massive invasion fleet was heading towards the French coast. Pretty clever.
It was, and it highlights how deception had to evolve to keep pace with the technology of the time.
Right.
But radar wasn't the only game changer. Electronic warfare also emerged as this major force in 20th century conflicts.
Okay, electronic warfare, that sounds pretty intense. What exactly does that involve?
Basically, it's about using electronic signals to disrupt or deceive the enemy.
Okay.
Think jamming enemy radar, creating fake radio transmissions, even hacking into their communication systems.
So it's like this virtual battlefield where you're fighting for control of the electromagnetic spectrum.
Exactly. And the Arab-Israeli conflicts, we saw a lot of this kind of electronic warfare. Both sides were constantly trying to outmaneuver each other in this electronic domain, using deception to gain an advantage.
I'm starting to see how technology has really blurred these lines between the physical and the virtual battlefield. But beyond technology, didn't things take a bit of a darker turn during this period? I'm thinking about the use of psychological warfare, especially during the Vietnam War.
You're right. The 20th century saw this rise in the use of psychological warfare, which aims to influence not just soldiers on the battlefield, but entire populations.
Wow.
It's about manipulating beliefs, emotions, behaviors to achieve a strategic objective.
And that's where propaganda comes in, right? Things like leaflets, radio broadcasts, even films.
Right.
All designed to shape public opinion and demoralize the enemy.
Exactly. And during the Cold War, both the U.S. and the Soviet Union, they were masters of this.
Right.
It became this constant battle for hearts and minds, waged through media, culture, even espionage.
So deception wasn't just happening on the battlefield, it was happening in living rooms and on radio waves all over the world.
That's right. And it's important to remember that psychological warfare isn't always about spreading these outright lies. Sometimes it's about exaggerating the truth, playing on existing fears, or even just creating confusion and doubt.
That's a bit unsettling, to be honest.
Yeah.
It makes you realize how vulnerable we all are to this kind of manipulation, even without realizing it.
It's a sobering thought, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it only becomes more challenging as we enter the digital age, where information spreads at lightning speed and these lines between truth and fiction are increasingly blurred.
Okay, now we're talking about things like cyber warfare and social media manipulation. This is where it gets really interesting for me. These are the battlefields of today, aren't they?
They are, and they present all sorts of new challenges and opportunities for deception.
Yeah.
Think of the Stuxnet virus, for example, which was designed to sabotage Iranian nuclear facilities.
Wasn't that the one that actually physically damaged the equipment by making it spin out of control? I remember reading about that pretty scary stuff.
It was. But what's even more remarkable is that Stuxnet also fed this false data back to the operators, making them think everything was working normally. It was this double whammy of sabotage and deception.
So they were literally being tricked by the very systems they were relying on.
Right.
That's a whole new level of insidiousness.
It is. And then there's the use of social media to spread misinformation and manipulate elections. Think about the efforts to interfere in the 2016 U.S. presidential election, allegedly by Russia.
Yeah, that was a wake-up call for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Suddenly, everyone was talking about fake news and bots and troll farms.
Right.
It made you realize how easily public opinion can be swayed by these coordinated disinformation campaigns.
Exactly. And social media platforms are the perfect breeding ground for this kind of deception because information spreads so quickly, and algorithms can amplify certain messages while suppressing others.
So in a way, we're all participants in this new information war, whether we realize it or not.
That's a great way to put it. And the stakes are high. We're talking about the potential to undermine democracy, sow discord, and even incite violence.
Okay, this is getting a bit heavy. We've gone from wooden horses and fake campfires to viruses that can sabotage nuclear facilities and algorithms that can manipulate millions of people.
It's come a long way.
It makes you wonder what's next.
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? What's clear is that deception, it's going to continue to evolve alongside technology.
Right.
And as artificial intelligence becomes more sophisticated, we're likely to see even more convincing and potentially dangerous forms of deception.
Like I've heard about these deep fakes where they can make anyone say or do anything on video.
Right.
It's getting to the point where you can't even trust your own eyes anymore.
That's right. And imagine the potential for using that kind of technology to spread disinformation or discredit your opponents. The possibilities are both fascinating and terrifying.
So it seems like we've entered this new era of deception where the battlefield is everywhere and the weapons are invisible. But before we get too carried away with the doom and gloom, I'm curious, are there any instances where deception might actually be a good thing?
That's a great question. And it's one that philosophers and ethicists have been grappling with for centuries. The truth is, there are times when deception can be used for positive purposes, even in the realm of warfare.
Okay, so we've established that deception can be a pretty slippery slope. But before we get too lost in this ethical maze, I'm really curious to hear about some specific examples where deception was actually used for a good cause.
You're in luck, because there are actually quite a few cases where deception has been used to protect innocent lives.
Okay.
Or even prevent greater harm.
Really, I'd love to hear about those.
Well, one fascinating example involves the use of misinformation during humanitarian crises.
Okay.
In certain situations, aid organizations have actually used deception to protect vulnerable populations from violence or exploitation.
That's intriguing. Can you give me an example?
Sure. Imagine a scenario where there's a refugee camp being targeted by armed groups.
Okay, yeah.
Aid workers might intentionally spread false rumors about the location of the camp.
Oh, wow.
Or the resources that are available there.
So they're essentially using deception to divert the attackers and protect the refugees.
Exactly. It's a risky strategy, of course.
Yeah.
But in some cases, it's been the only way to ensure the safety of those in need.
Wow. That really challenges my assumptions about deception. I guess sometimes a little white lie can actually save lives.
Right, and it highlights the importance of considering the context and the intentions behind any act of deception. It's not always black and white.
No, this whole conversation has been a real eye-opener. I'm starting to see deception in a whole new light. It's not just about tricks and manipulation. It's about understanding psychology, exploiting assumptions, and ultimately shaping perceptions.
Yeah, exactly. And as we move further into the 21st century, with these rapid advancements in technology, the potential for both good and bad deception, it's only going to continue to grow.
So what does this all mean for us? As we navigate this increasingly complex world of information warfare and blurred realities, how can we protect ourselves from being deceived?
Well, the first step is awareness. We need to understand the tactics, the techniques that are being used to manipulate us, both online and offline.
So we need to be more critical thinkers, question our assumptions, and be wary of information that seems too good to be true.
Exactly. Don't just blindly accept everything you see or hear, especially on social media.
Right.
Take the time to verify information from multiple sources and be skeptical of anything that seems designed to provoke an emotional response.
That's good advice. And I guess it's also about being mindful of our own biases.
Yeah.
We all have these preconceived notions that can make us vulnerable to manipulation.
Absolutely. If we're not aware of our own biases, it's easier for someone to exploit them.
Right.
So being self-aware and open-minded, that's crucial.
This has been a fascinating journey through the world of military deception, from ancient times to the digital age. We've uncovered the strategies, the psychology, and the ethical dilemmas involved.
And it's clear that deception is not going away.
Yeah.
It's a tool that will continue to be used for both good and bad purposes.
So as we wrap up our deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with a final thought. Deception is a powerful force, and like any powerful tool, it can be used to build or to destroy.
Yeah.
The choice ultimately lies with us.
Well said. It's up to each of us to be informed, discerning, and vigilant in the face of deception.
Right.
We need to be the guardians of truth in a world where it's becoming increasingly elusive.
That's a great note to end on. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive.
Oh, the pleasure was all mine. I always enjoy exploring the complexities of deception with such a curious mind.
And to our listeners out there, stay sharp, stay skeptical, and keep questioning everything. You never know when you might be the target of the next great deception.